Hey, good morning, everyone. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us this morning. Excited everyone's here. We are seeing some familiar faces on our RSVP list, so we appreciate you attending. Today, we're going to do a brief dive into fire alarm basics. As we roll along, if there are any questions, feel free to type those into the chat box, and Edwin and myself will answer them after the presentation. Also, at the end, we'll announce the winner for the $50 gift card. So myself and Edwin will be presenting today. I'm Adam. I'm the sales manager for Kentucky and Southern Indiana. I've been with Ryan going on 9 years. I've been in the industry a little over 10. Edwin is the sales manager for Northern and Central Indiana, and I believe he's going on 11 years with Ryan Fireprotection. So this is a snapshot of what we're going to dig into today. We're going to tell you a little bit about us and who we are. As always, we'll give you a brief overview of fire alarm systems. We'll go over what's required on your end from a building owner standpoint, property manager standpoint, or a tenant standpoint. So we'll share some fun stuff about fire alarm history with you folks. We'll go over what it means to have a conventional system versus addressable. We'll look at the different types of fire alarm devices. We'll talk to you about what a proprietary system entails versus a non-proprietary system. We'll talk to you about monitoring and what that's used for. And then we'll go through some of the common issues that we see on our end on a day-to-day basis. And then lastly, we'll tell you what you need to do as far as inspection, testing, and maintaining your fire alarm systems. So Ryan Fireprotection, we're headquartered in Noblesville, or I like to say Indianapolis. We have branch offices throughout the Midwest, Fort Wayne, Valparaiso covering that Chicago market, South Bend, Louisville, Milwaukee, and Bloomington. We're celebrating our 32nd year in business. We're owned and operated by two brothers. We specialize in inspecting, testing fire sprinkler systems, fire alarms, special hazards, fire extinguishers, emergency lights, exit lights. We're sitting right at about 300 employees to date, give or take. Over to you, Edwin.
Thanks, Adam. Today, we're going to talk about, like Adam said, fire alarms specifically. A lot of the information that we're covering today are going to come from two primary sources. Source one being NFPA 72, which is the National Fire Alarm and Signaling Code, and the other is the National Electrical Code, or the NEC. Please keep in mind that depending on your geography and the state in which you are working and where your buildings are located, different versions of these two books are maybe adopted. Therefore, what we're telling you today is pretty basic in general in scope. However, there may be some nuances and variations to what's actually required in your state versus Indiana versus Illinois, Kentucky, etc. Because of that. I want to reiterate that this is super basic. We could probably spend 5 hours talking about this today, but we're going to try to keep this to about 20-25 minutes. Like I said, we have another version of this presentation that's a lot more in depth. That's 60 slides with tons and tons of information. If you really want that, if you want to know more or want some more information, we can certainly do a kind of a one-off with whoever's interested. But today we're going to keep it super simple. So first things first is what is a fire alarm system? So simply put, a fire alarm system is a series of devices and equipment that work together to notify people through notification appliances of the presence of fire, smoke, carbon monoxide, etc., via what we call initiating devices, and we'll kind of get into that, what notification or indicating devices are, and what initiating devices are here in just a few slides. Fire alarm systems, they can be very basic and monitor just a few points by a small zone system, all the way to a very complex system that monitor hundreds and hundreds of devices, and then even systems that monitor hundreds of devices and then connect back to, say, a primary panel, if you've got multiple campus of buildings, that they all report back to one main fire alarm panel, and they all kind of talk to each other and are interconnected. And there's different ways that if you don't have one of those systems and you want to interconnect, you can do that. So it can get very basic, all the way up to uber complicated, which we won't get into today. But just know there's lots of options out there. Lastly, there are many different makes, models, brands, etc. that's out there on the market. With almost every make and model, they produce both addressable and conventional type equipment, which is the difference. You hear a lot of, like in layman's terms, smart devices and dumb devices. Not that any of them are dumb, but it just, they aren't as smart in their zone. They're not addressable, which we'll get into a little bit more, and we'll discuss that in a few slides.
That's it, man. Thank you. So from a building owner standpoint, a property manager standpoint, what's required from you folks from a fire alarm outlook? Well, you are required to have it inspected, tested, and maintained on a either quarterly or an annual basis. Frequently, I mean, most frequent we're seeing is annual on the fire alarm side. We do have some quarterly customers as well. So after these inspections are completed, you are required to keep the records in hand. And then if there are any deficiencies that stem from these inspections, you would be required to get those corrected and fixed. Change in occupancy, use, and process. This is something I really like to talk about because folks sometimes move into new buildings or they purchase a new building and it may be set up for just storage, you know, a very quiet warehouse, not a lot of employees, and now they're going to start making cardboard with large corrugated machines where the ambient decibel reading or the sound in the warehouse is going to be much higher than it was previously. So it's always great to keep in mind if you're making changes, even little remodels to your office space or warehouse, or buying or leasing a new building, to let folks like us know. Like I said, I thought it would be fun to share a little bit of data and history with you folks. It's really neat to see this first date here, this April 28th, 1852 was the first fire alarm system. It was placed into service in 1852 in Boston. And this isn't intended to scare you folks by any means, but you know, 60% of fire deaths are resulted from smoke alarms not working or not being installed. So I know some of this equipment can be out of sight and out of mind. So from a building owner, property manager standpoint, it's important to verify that these devices work on a regular basis. I thought it'd be fun to share some of the data on when fire-related deaths occur. Fires happen most frequently between 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. in the morning. And the peak times are 2 a.m. to 5 a.m. So I know some of you may be working first shift, some other facilities may be working around the clock. Just something to keep in mind. You know, we obviously hope none of you have to experience a fire, but if you're thinking, you know, how do I reduce the loss of property or life in the event of a fire? And our answer is, you know, have a fully functioning, compliant fire alarm system, because smoke detectors alone reduce the chance of death by 50%. Over to you, Edwin.
Thanks, Adam. So like I mentioned before, we're going to talk about the difference between conventional and addressable systems. Conventional systems are typically smaller type systems. When I refer to smaller, meaning fewer devices, smaller facilities, or maybe just a sprinkler system and no other alarm devices or equipment. In these systems, each device is connected. That's connected to the system doesn't have a specific address or its own address. And it's not identifiable by the fire alarm panel, but rather each zone or area can be identified, such as a floor or an area of building or something like that. So if you have a trouble, so say you have a trouble and you've got I've seen hotels, for example, that are 3 stories that have conventional systems, and each floor is one zone, and they have a smoke detector that gives them trouble, and it's going to say smoke detector trouble zone 1, which means the first floor. You just don't know which smoke detector, so it takes a lot more time and energy to identify where that's at, versus if you have an addressable system and a smoke detector gives you fits, you'll be able to identify exactly where it is because that particular device has its own address. Typically, these are larger systems and more complex systems. They don't have to be, though. That's just typically kind of what we see out there in the market. One key thing is addressable systems actually require less cabling, less wiring, which is kind of a fun fact, and they're much easier to diagnose problems than a zone system. There are and absolutely plenty of scenarios where a zone system makes perfect sense or a conventional system makes sense. It all depends on what you're looking to get out of your system, which that's something that, you know, when you're going to buy a system or get into purchasing a new one or replacing a system, that we kind of do that analysis with you to make sure that money is spent correctly. The next, here we want to talk about the fire alarm devices. So as I mentioned earlier, there's two main types of devices, or categories of devices rather: initiating and indicating. It can be a tongue twister if you say it too fast, but initiating devices are devices that initiate a alarm or a trouble or some sort of a signal, and those can be, we have some examples here on the right: smoke detectors, duct detectors, heat detectors. They're going to send a signal, initiate a signal to a fire alarm control panel, put the system into trouble and get you a phone call to let you know that something's wrong, or put it into an alarm, which would then bring fire trucks to come and assist you with whatever your emergency was. Pole stations also an initiating device. Water flow switches and pressure switches on a sprinkler system, those are initiating devices. Now, indicating devices are just what they sound like. They're devices that indicate that there is an alarm, and these are pretty simple. You could probably guess, obviously, without seeing it here, what those are, which are horn strobes, strobe only devices, chimes in hospitals and different areas where the loud, abrupt noise is not something that you want to scare everybody. So yeah, those kind of the difference between initiating and indicating. This is just a small example of the pool of what these devices are. We can get into more of those one-on-one, and you may have some different stuff than what you see here, beam detectors and other crazy things that exist, but just the general idea of what we're talking about.
Thanks, Edwin. We definitely wanted to get into what it means to have a proprietary system versus a non-proprietary system. So we deal with two different types. Some folks know whether or not they have a proprietary versus non-proprietary, some don't. So we'll start at proprietary. What is it? Well, there's subtypes of proprietary systems. There is a manufacturer type system, and this means that only the installing manufacturer can perform tasks like programming and in some cases even device replacements. A few of you with us today may have these type of systems. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, other folks like Ryan Fire can't test or maintain these systems for you. We are still fully capable of performing these duties. I'd obviously recommend staying away from a manufacturer proprietary type system versus the distributorship type system, and I'll explain why. So the distributor type system, it gives you more flexibility to work with different vendors. So it gives you more options and you're not stuck with one company. In short, companies like us and others become approved distributors and installers of the equipment. And that also gives you a peace of mind that our staff has been factory trained and qualified to work on the system. And the other type of system, the last one here, is non-proprietary, and there's some good and bad things with that. So essentially, a non-proprietary system is a system that any contractor with a license can purchase and install. So many of these systems are great. They perform well. I just caution you on who you select to perform the work, because there's no guarantee what type of experience or training these contractors have had. And one last note on the proprietary type systems. Typically your larger, more robust or complex systems are going to have to be either manufacturer proprietary or distributor type proprietary panels. You know, some of your smaller systems, you know, 30,000 square foot office buildings probably won't need a proprietary type panel, but if you have some, you know, a chemical manufacturing plant with lots of different types of devices, you'd probably be in one of those two categories, the proprietary. We also wanted to talk about monitoring. If you do have a fire alarm panel, you are required to have it monitored by a third party or a central station. And what that does for you is it communicates to you, and it communicates to the authorities having jurisdiction, like the fire departments. In the event of a fire or trouble, you're going to know about it, and the fire department's going to know about it. If you have a low air on a dry sprinkler system, and it's just maybe just a pinhole leak on a pipe, you probably want to know about it before it accidentally trips the system. And there's a few different ways outside of monitoring options that I'm showing here on this slide, but the most common that we see are telephone lines, a cell dialer, radio, and internet. The three most common out of the four would be telephone lines, cell dialer, and internet. We also wanted to share some common issues with you folks, and where do we start here? Fire alarm systems they're expected to help protect people and property and their assets, so you can't always look at a system and determine if it's fully functional. Electronics and components, wiring, they can degrade over time, and it's not always easy to see that. So starting at the top, one of the most common things we see is faulty devices, smoke detectors, like the picture we show here. Sometimes they just get dirty, too much dust, depends on what type of environment they're in. They get damaged by forklifts or hit. And then another common thing we see a lot is water damage. There's heavy industrial facilities that may do semi-annual or annual cleaning. They might not realize they shouldn't be spraying water or any type of cleaning equipment supplies on these devices. So water's really bad with electric. We all know that. Ground faults are another very difficult, very common thing that we see. They can be difficult to track down, but simply put, your fire alarm system is constantly monitoring your wiring as well, and a lot of people don't know that. So when the metal in the building vibrates or touches the fire alarm wiring, this can create a ground fault. And once a ground fault is pops up on your panel, you definitely want to address it. I'm not saying that it's a critical issue, but we definitely want to get out there right away and track it down. And these are some of the reasons on why they happen. You know, buildings vibrate, the land, the environment vibrates. Sometimes air handlers on the roof will vibrate and cause a ground fault. Overhead doors going up and down in big distribution warehouses, wind, water leaks, roof leaks, or again, cleaning crews, sanitation crews, you know, hitting water on devices or wiring and making it touch the building. And then another common thing for ground faults is installation issues. If it wasn't installed properly, you're gonna see some ground faults over time. So how do we handle or address a ground fault when it happens? How do we troubleshoot this issue? Well, basically we have to test each circuit to find the fault. Okay, and there are various ways to do this. We'll start at the panel, and once we determine what circuit the fault is on, we'll begin breaking down that circuit and splitting it to find exactly where that ground fault is located. And if there are any questions on this, I know hopefully I'm not going too fast, you know, throw them in the chat box and we can hit them at the end here. Something else we see a lot is the motherboard or the control panel being fried, and a lot of this is Mother Nature and the environment and power surges and lightning. And sometimes surge protection isn't enough for a lightning strike. It carries a lot more power than what people think, and even if you do have surge protection, it sometimes doesn't work. So something to think about there. And then the last is communication issues. A lot of times, folks with cell dialers can see communicating from the central station monitoring to the panel. And then folks like you will get calls that your panel's not communicating properly. So overall, these are the, probably the top 5 common issues we see on a day-to-day basis with fire alarm systems.
Yeah, the next kind of the next topic here, one of our in closing is a question that, maybe people are asking themselves now or will here in the future. Is my system up to date? Is it current with current codes and standards? Is it where it needs to be for today's standards? And that is kind of a tough question to answer. We get that question quite a bit, and it's kind of a loaded question because there's a lot of variables that go into it. So there's a few factors, there's a lot of factors, but a few of the main factors we look at, I have kind of listed here that we'll talk about. First one's first is replacement part availability. If you've ever had an issue, you got an older system and you call somebody and you're like, well, they don't make that, they don't support that anymore, but we'll see what we can come up with. So the manufacturers may not make a piece or a part, board or whatever. They may not make the devices or something that you need to get your system back online. If that's the case, maybe it's part of a bigger plan would be to potentially replace that piece of equipment. I will say that there are options out there, and we went down these roads before where you can buy some things online, some refurbished equipment online to get systems back up and running. Now, sometimes they don't come with warranties, and there's some other issues that may arise with that. And know that eventually, it may be all she wrote. That may be the last one ever available because people aren't going to be refurbishing them anymore. So it's just something to keep in mind as replacement part availability. Next is software update support. So just like your cell phones, like your computers, everything else, if there's software, it needs to be updated for bug fixes, for malware, for any other issues that may be going on with your system, or they may have found things that need to be fixed, and they'll push updates out. If there's no software support or update support, it may be time to start thinking about a potential replacement at some point in time. Now, it's hard to put timelines on that. It's kind of a case-by-case scenario. Is it something that needs to happen immediately? Probably not, but it's just something to think about over the next 6 to 24 months out from when they stop supporting the software. Next, like Adam talked about, communication lines. There are a lot of options when it comes to monitoring services and different ways to monitor, whether it's 2 cell lines, whether it's just a plain old telephone or a POTS line, or one of each, or doing it over the internet or whatever. Is your system able to take and handle the IPGSM or the cell backup? Maybe not without some other attachments or some other equipment. If it's not, then maybe it's time to start thinking about a potential upgrade. But again, there's different add-ons and attachments that you can tie into your panels that will make it adaptable. It's just something we have to look at case by case. My personal recommendation, I don't want to speak for the entire organization, but my personal recommendation is having one of each. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, like 2 POTS lines. So having a POTS line, a phone line, and a cell backup is my recommendation in case one goes down. If the phone system goes down and you have 2 POTS lines, then the whole thing doesn't work. But if the phone line goes down, you have a cell backup, at least something works. Just my 2 cents. Lastly is listed wiring or cabling. There's specific wire that's required for fire alarm systems, solid wire. What we see, or I have seen in some older systems that before, NFPA and NEC, National Electrical Code had requirements on this, I was just at a facility last week that the fire alarm system is ran with, I'm gonna call it lamp cord, and is just what it sounds like. It's the same type of cord that is found in the lamp that sits in the corner of your living room. And that's how this fire alarm system is ran. So it's not listed wiring. My recommendation to that particular client is to start thinking about a plan to get it up and running, because they have tons of faults and ground faults because they don't have the right wire in place. So just a few things to think about here as you go on your day-to-day. Next slide, Adam. Lastly, I know we had a question here on testing. So inspection, testing, maintenance. I'm going to keep this really brief because there's a lot of nuances when it comes to this. So annual inspection of initiating devices. So your detectors, heat detectors, smoke detectors, duct detectors, those are required to be inspected annually. Biannual sensitivity testing, which is every other year on your detectors. There's a kind of a lot to do that. I won't bore you with the details. We can explain that more one-on-one if you have questions, but it takes a little longer. It's more involved with that testing. Finally, visual and audio inspection of indicating devices. So your horn strobes, chimes, etc. You're required to do an annual visual inspection of those to make sure they work, make sure the decibel level is adequate, etc. Adam? I think you're muted, Adam.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Thanks, Edwin. Yeah, we're trying to keep these short and as informative as we can, not take too much of your time. So if there's something like Edwin said that you do want us to spend a little bit more time on, don't feel bad to reach out. It doesn't cost you anything to have a phone conversation or a site visit with us. We're going to announce the winner to the gift card first. It looks like just got the Rick McAllister. Thanks, Rick, for attending. We will distribute your gift card to you shortly. All right, we'll get into the questions now. All right. Do you want to kick us off, Edwin? Or we just have one here?
Sure. Yeah, I can start here. Looks like Sarah asked, are weekly and monthly tests per NFPA codes required or just suggested? And that is a very good question. It's something that we kind of battle on a daily basis for both sprinkler, alarm, everywhere. NFPA has some specific requirements down to even some stuff on a daily basis that needs to be checked, visuals and things like that. The short answer is it depends. So the state in which you are located, I'll give you Indiana as example I'm going to use because I don't know where you're at, Sarah. I think I do, but regardless, in Indiana, NFPAs are adopted, codes are adopted by the state, which puts them into law. And just because it's by law, that doesn't mean that's exactly what they enforce. So if weekly inspections are per code, it doesn't mean that the fire department is coming by or the fire marshal's coming by and making sure that you're doing your weeklies. They're typically just making sure you're doing at least annuals, if that makes sense. So it's a kind of a tough question to answer. I don't know if I answered it completely. I put my email address and Adam's email address in the Q&A. I think as an announcement, I think you all can see it. Feel free to reach out directly and what we can address your concern specifically. But the short answer is it depends on the local AHJ authority having jurisdiction and what they're going to come out and actually check on and make sure you do.
Hey, Edwin, can you see this code requirement sheet that I'm sharing?
I can.
You cannot?
I can, yes.
You can? Yeah, so we could get this out to you folks. This entails some sprinkler, what you should be doing visually on a daily, weekly basis, on a monthly basis, annual, semi-annual. But there are some fire alarm requirements, and a lot of this stuff is all visual, right? So we can get this out to you folks for reference, and then for functional testing. So now this is actually inspecting, testing, and maintaining your system. So something we can get out to you so you know what the code book is telling you. But like Edwin was saying, it's up to 2 people. It's up to your insurance carrier and your fire marshal. So let's see, we have another question here. Do you have any concerns with fire companies resetting an alarm after they finish their investigation and do their due diligence? No, not whatsoever. I think if we're talking about fire companies like Orion Fireprotection, or are you talking about a fire marshal? I think either would be fine. But no, I do not. I wouldn't have any concerns.
No.
You, Edwin?
No, I think that's, as long as everybody's doing their due diligence and they understand what they're looking for, everything's in service and what have you, then absolutely go ahead and reset it. If it's not reset, then it's not working as it's intended to. So the sooner it's reset, the better, in my opinion. So yeah, no problem at all. I see the next question here is, can we send a visual inspection sheet? Yes, we can. I put in the announcements here our email addresses. So we have, I know a lot of people join anonymously, which is perfectly acceptable. Other people, we have just their first names. Teams doesn't allow us to see exactly who's on here. So if you guys whoever would like this, I'm reluctant to say just email us directly because my email is probably going to blow up, but it's fine. Send Adam or myself an email with your address and exactly what we can help you with, whether that's as a slide deck, no problem, or the visual inspection sheet Adam just had pulled up. Again, no problem. Just send us an email. We'll get it to you here probably yet today. Thanks,
Edwin. How do we know if our equipment is manufacturer or distributor type proprietary? We could simply just look at your panel, and we would be able to figure that out really quickly. You could even just type it in the chat box if you wanted to really quick, and Edwin and I could look at it, and we should be able to make a determination for you. What else? We'll hang tight here and see if there are any other questions.
I just published another one here. Will proprietary systems and distributors sell and warrant their components with any non-proprietary system? So typically a proprietary company is only going to sell proprietary stuff. So they would only warrant whatever they're selling, if I understand this question correctly. That does not mean that, like for us, for example, we have both a proprietary line as a distributor, and then we have a non-proprietary line that we can provide that is not as robust as the proprietary stuff, but we will warrant whatever we install. So whether it's proprietary or not proprietary, doesn't matter. Whatever we physically install that has our name on it will come with a warranty on the components and on the labor. I hope that answered your question. If not, email me directly and I'll get you squared away.
See anything else, Edwin? Sorry, folks, if you're looking at the side of my head here, I'm just seeing if anything else is popping in the chat box.
I don't see anything here. I think we got everything addressed. I know a couple of people, there's been some duplicate questions that we didn't publish on the slide decks and the visual sheet. I already got a couple of requests here in my email. So yeah, we'll get these out. I'll get this response here in the next 30 minutes to you folks that want this stuff. I'll get this slide deck PDF'd and fired off to those who want it.
Okay. If that's it, we appreciate the time and thanks for joining us today. And our next one, I think Edwin and I are gearing for July. If there are any special requests, reach out to Edwin or myself, and maybe our next virtual training will be on a topic that you chose. So have a good day. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.